CBS News, this is Frank Centopani. Weather permitting, Space Shuttle Challenger should be soaring to the heavens in 30 minutes. Christopher Glenn reports from the Kennedy Space Center.
The 7-man Challenger crew has been inside the spacecraft for more than an hour now, busy with the myriad items on their checkout list. It's been a smooth countdown so far, except for one thing.
We have a report from the superintendent of range operations that a flight critical, range safety critical computer that's used in tracking of the shuttle vehicle has gone down. That computer is required for launch, and there's no estimate at this time as to how long it will take to repair that system, bring it back online.
Well, they have got that problem fixed within the last minute or so, and so the count has resumed. Everything is going smoothly, and less than 20 minutes left in the count procedure itself. There's one more built-in hold period of 10 minutes, and we expect launch about a half an hour from now. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
This is a live special report from AP Network News, the launch of the Space Shuttle. I'm Michael Weinfeld. In less than 2 minutes from now, if all goes well, the Space Shuttle Challenger will lift off from Cape Canaveral, the beginning of a week-long mission for 7 astronauts. Standing by at the Cape with a front row seat for the liftoff is AP correspondent Dick Giuliano.
In Florida. Good afternoon. From where we're seated, we have a fine view of the Space Shuttle Challenger, ready for blast-off from Launch Pad 39A. This will be the 19th Space Shuttle mission and Challenger's 8th trip into space. And by the way, America's 50th manned space launch. This mission is devoted to science, although we've come to think of the Space Shuttle as a space truck carrying communication satellites to orbit. This flight will make no deliveries. Its cargo bay is outfitted with the European Space Lab, turning Challenger into an orbiting laboratory. In the background, you can hear the voice of launch control, Jim Ball.
T-minus 16 seconds.
We are T-minus 53 seconds and counting. 7 crew members aboard. The commander is NASA veteran Gordon Fullerton. Seated to Fullerton's right is pilot Roy Bridges. The remainder of the crew are scientists. They'll have plenty to do. They'll work in 2 teams, round the clock, 12-hour shifts each.
30 seconds.
We have a go for auto sequence start. Challenger's computers have primary control of critical vehicle functions. The ground launch sequencer will now serve in a support mode. T-minus 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 16 seconds. The computers have armed the SRB ignition, hold down post, and T0 umbilical. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. We have an RSLS abort. We have an abort.
GLS safing in progress. BFS and pass are showing 101.
GLS safing is in progress at this time.
All right, we do have an abort here at the Kennedy Space Center. Challenger still perched on the launch pad. I see a puff of smoke. The Space Shuttle is in good condition.
Launch attempt.
Now we can see water being poured into what appears to be the flame trench beneath the Challenger, and now water being poured onto the orbiter itself.
Dick, can you tell what is the reason for the abort?
Water on the pad has been activated.
No sign of what happened yet, Michael. Stand by.
Go for orbiter AP shutdown.
We are go for APU shutdown.
Okay, let's see if we can get...
All right, they're closing this down. There was obviously some problem here on the launch pad. In the background there, you're hearing the voice of launch control, Jim Ball.
As of this time, precisely, is why we had this abort of this afternoon's launch attempt. We have had a redundant set launch sequencer cutoff.
We have no plan. No plan. OVCC.
That sounded like Commander Gordon Fullerton.
This is CDSS. The OAA is extended and locked.
The orbiter access arm has been retracted back into place against the white room. It is locked in place.
Stand by for post-abort change.
The astronauts certainly are safe
We have a series of stations
at this point.
coming up.
Shutdown. Okay, that works.
Now, from the long-range view, there's some smoke around the base of the shuttle right now, Dick. What is that?
Well, at the point of launch at which we had that abort on the countdown clock, we have T-minus 3 seconds. So at about that time, the main engines were about to start firing. I can't really tell you for certain what that smoke is from.
Monitoring various sensors on the launch pad to determine whether there are any leaks, any fire. All indications are preliminary that systems are safe.
Let me mention, if there were any danger to the astronauts at this point, they have a system of emergency escape from the launch pad. They would slide down on guide wires and baskets and go below the launch pad into a trench where they would be protected from any fire or explosions.
So right now they're just waiting it out, trying to figure out what's going on like the rest of us.
Ground launch sequencer safing has been reported complete.
You can see water is being poured onto the tail section where the main engines would be of the orbiter Challenger. Challenger is the most seasoned of the space shuttle orbiters.
Both the flight crew aboard orbiter Challenger and the test team here in the Launch Control Center is in the process of backing out of this launch attempt, making sure that everything is safe on the vehicle. We have no report yet as to what caused this abort.
There you have it. That's Jim Ball saying they don't know what happened to abort.
Isn't this very unusual for it to abort so close to after the engines have fired?
Well, this is the 19th space shuttle mission. I don't remember one coming quite this close. The astronauts are still in the cockpit, and as I say, apparently not in any danger at this time.
Orbiter Challenger sensed that there was something wrong and commanded a shutdown of the 3 main engines. That automatic sequence, which cuts off the launch countdown within T-minus 31 seconds, and particularly after main engine start.
Dick, what are they actually doing to make sure the astronauts are safe? Are they doing anything in particular to keep them protected?
Well, what they're doing at this point, Michael, is making sure that there's no fire, anything flammable on the launch pad that's leaking. Let's remember, these men are surrounded by flammable, highly explosive fuel. That external tank, that huge cone-shaped device in the center of the space shuttle configuration holds 500,000 pounds of fuel, liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. And then you have the 2 solid rocket boosters, which add up to something like 2.9 million pounds of thrust. So certainly the safety of the astronauts is of paramount concern right now. They don't want to move them away until they're certain there are no leaks.
The long-range cameras show that there are lots of water being poured onto the shuttle and the base of the shuttle. What is that? Is that a precautionary measure against fire?
I don't know. Appears that way. That launch pad, by the way, about as big as a baseball diamond. Excuse me.
LPDSP. Okay, have them on the trigger in case we need it back. FPO copies that. Stand by. We'll be watching. Copy.
How long before Cape Canaveral decides that the wait is too long and then they'll have the astronauts come off the shuttle and try again some other time?
Hard to say. I think they're playing this one by ear.
LTD cargo. Cargo. Like to verify the VFI tape recorder switch back on it.
As I mentioned earlier, the launch clock reads T-minus 3 seconds.
Dick, it looks like it's going to be a long hold on this countdown, and we have a delay with the Space Shuttle Challenger, and we'll keep everyone advised on our live coverage later on today, but the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger has been aborted just 3 seconds before liftoff, and some computers had detected that something was wrong, and they stopped the firing of the ship's engines in mid-sequence. And that was on the 50th manned space flight for the American space program, an inauspicious beginning for the next 50 flights. This has been a live special report from AP Network News.
CBS News, I'm Douglas Edwards.
5, 4, 3, 2, We have an RSLS abort. We have an abort.
The Space Shuttle Challenger's main engines ignited and then shut down about 30 minutes ago, 3 seconds before the planned liftoff of the nation's 19th shuttle mission. Correspondent Christopher Glenn is at the Cape. Chris, what happened?
Douglas, I don't know. NASA doesn't know at this point either. The only thing that is known is that the crew is safe. There was no fire on the pad after the abort was performed by the onboard computers of the shuttle. Apparently, the problem had something to do with one of the 3 main engines that is aboard the shuttlecraft, and that reminds, although NASA officials are quick to point out it's not necessarily so, that there was a similar problem aboard a mission about a year ago, back last June, when it was 4 seconds before launch when the abort was performed. But really, at this point, they do not have a handle on it yet. All we do know is that there is a closeout crew now back up in the gantry tower, preparing to open the hatch and get the astronauts out of there. A very disappointed crew, a very disappointed lot of NASA folks about today.
Then you have no word on when the flight might get off.
The only thing that we've heard sort of casually during the commentary from Mission Launch Control was that there would be a minimum 48-hour turnaround period. But at this point, I would say that even isn't a safe bet. Last time this happened, a year ago, they had to eventually to roll the whole rocket assembly back to its hangar building, yank the faulty engine, and put a new one in, and it wasn't until a month later that that flight finally got off.
There's a crew of 7 now getting off the ship, and a multi-million-dollar telescope pointer so accurate it can zero in on a dime 2 miles away. Tell us in a few seconds, Chris, about plans for this mission.
Yes, Doug, that was a part of a $72 million package of scientific instruments and experiments that was going to be performed, which officials had said was going to rewrite the astronomy textbooks. Looks like they'll have to wait a little longer to do that rewriting now.
Christopher Glenn at Cape Canaveral reporting on the aborted liftoff of the Space Shuttle Challenger. Now this. CBS News, this is Frank Sedotani. President Reagan's Challenger was aborted just 3 seconds from the end of today's countdown to liftoff. Shuttle project manager Robert Lindstrom says a computer detected a problem and shut down the shuttle's 3 engines, which had ignited and reached full power.
We had a failure of a chamber coolant control valve on engine 2, which is open, full open at start, signal of engine 2. And after 1.46 seconds, we command that valve under control of channel A to close down to 70%. And when we gave it the command signal, the valve failed to close.
The backup system did work, but NASA rules require an abort unless there's an additional backstop. The shuttle crew is safe and has been removed from the craft.
Uganda has a new military leader after the weekend coup. Peru's new president slows down foreign debt payment. Shuttle Challenger ready for a second try. Good morning. This is Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. We're keeping a close eye on the weather at the Florida spaceport and at emergency landing spots as the countdown proceeds toward launch time for the 19th shuttle mission. Peter Van Zandt reports.
The Space Shuttle Challenger will get another chance at space this afternoon. The last launch attempt on July 12th ended in disappointment.
We have an RSLS abort. We have an abort.
NASA officials say a faulty engine valve that caused the abort has been replaced, and the ship is ready to fly. NASA spokesman Charles Redmond says Challenger's Spacelab mission is a scientist's dream.
It is all science, it's all research, it's all thinking.
But there is a problem that Sam Keller of NASA says can't be fixed before launch time.
The prime computer that supports the experiment has failed, and the backup computer has been moved into that position.
But if that backup fails during flight, NASA officials say all 13 experiments will be lost. NASA says the chance of that happening is remote. Weather permitting, Challenger is scheduled to blast off this afternoon at 3:23 Eastern Time. On board will be 7 astronauts, 33,000 pounds of scientific instruments, and 2 space cola cans, one from Coca-Cola, the other from Pepsi. The astronauts say they won't do a taste test. Peter Van Sant, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
From ABC News, I'm John Degnan.
For this afternoon's launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger, the second attempt this month. NASA says the countdown is running smoothly, and if it continues that way, the Challenger will blast off at 3:23 p.m. Eastern Time for a week-long mission to study the sun, the stars, and other space mysteries.
Sleep.
CBS News, this is Mitchell Krause. The White Challenger and its 7-man crew is poised for the rescheduled launch into orbit from Cape Canaveral in about 20 minutes, but during a planned hold in the countdown, NASA scientists are troubleshooting a bulking nozzle controlling the solid-fuel booster rockets that could delay the launch. Frank Motek reports on the scientific experiments that the Challenger will attempt when it finally achieves orbit.
The main concern right now is about a main computer monitoring the Spacelab studies of the universe, which has been shut down because of a problem. Scientists are keeping their fingers crossed that a backup computer will do the job. NASA spokesman James Kukowski says an experiment vital to future missions will also be conducted.
The prime objective is to test out the instrument pointing system aboard the shuttle that is presently carrying 3 telescopes. Later on in March of next year, it will be used for what we call the Astro mission. This will be a very important mission which will be photographing the Halley's Comet.
America's 50th manned spaceflight is being called the most ambitious scientific mission ever flown. That is, if everything will work. Frank Motek for CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Thomas in Washington. Just a few minutes from now, NASA was scheduled to make a second try at putting Space Shuttle Challenger in orbit. It was just 2.5 weeks ago that the launch of Challenger was scuttled 3 seconds from liftoff. Today, after what up until this point had been a flawless countdown, a delay. The AP's Dick Giuliano is at the Kennedy Space Center.
Well, it's another problem here, Jan, for 51F, Mission 51F, the Space Shuttle Challenger, carrying in its cargo bay the Spacelab 2, built by the European Space Agency. As you mentioned, 2.5 weeks ago, the flight was aborted right on the launch pad. Right now, we are in the midst of an indefinite delay. NASA officials say the earliest it could get off the ground this afternoon is about 4:30. Now, the problem with this is rather technical. One of 3 gyro rate assemblies in the solid rocket booster, one of 2 solid rocket boosters, has failed, and the launch team announced the hold just a minute ago. We are at T-minus 9 minutes, and holding. They say the earliest Challenger can take off will be 4:30 Eastern Time. NASA engineers are troubleshooting. They're trying to reload a backup flight system. The flight crew, 7 men, have been aboard the Challenger for about 3 hours, and I assume are just waiting this thing out. This is Dick Giuliano at the Kennedy Space Center.
And so Space Shuttle Challenger remains on the pad at this hour, awaiting a reset of launch systems to hopefully propel 7 crew members and Spacelab 2 into orbit. AP Network News will keep you up to date on the scheduled launch of Space Shuttle Challenger. This concludes this live special report with the AP's Dick Giuliano at the Kennedy Space Center. I'm Jan Thomas, AP Network News.
CBS News, this is Rob Armstrong. Another delay for the Space Shuttle Challenger.
We have recycled the count to the T-minus 20-minute and holding point for the purpose of verifying exactly where a problem exists.
The voice of mission control. The shuttle was scheduled to be launched about a half hour ago, but that's been put off now for about an hour. Details from Frank Motek of CBS Radio Miami affiliate WINZ at the Kennedy Space Center.
NASA spokesman Jim Mizell says the problem started when a device called a gyro on the solid rocket booster attached to the shuttle malfunctioned. A gyro is a device which controls the stability of the rocket. Mizell says NASA specialists took immediate action to try to correct the problem.
From the firing room, they instructed the orbiter to not pay any attention to the SRB rate gyro. We have 3 of them. It's triply redundant, so we're going to go on 2 instead of the 3rd one.
However, a computer aboard the shuttle did not accept programming instructions properly, and now technicians are trying to track down the glitch. The 7-man crew remains on the shuttle in the cockpit awaiting further instructions. The weather forecast still looks good for a late afternoon launch. Frank Motek for CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
The delay this afternoon was a gyroscope in one of the booster rockets that malfunctioned, and they tried to restart and reset their computers. And they did that, I guess about an hour ago. They actually got the computers up and going and decided to reset for the launch at 5 o'clock.
For auto sequence start.
They have just announced that they have a go for auto sequence start. Let's go down to the voice of mission control for the last 30 seconds of the launch.
20 seconds. Everything is go. T-minus 12. T-minus 10. We have go for engine start. T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition and liftoff. We have liftoff of Challenger and Spacelab 2. The shuttle has cleared the tower.
Tower clear. Roll program initiated. Challenger. Houston now controlling. They'll be throttling down to 65% throttles on their main engines. Now throttling down. Now at 65%. Velocity now 1,000 feet per second. Distance downrange 2 nautical miles. Altitude 4.1. Challenger Houston, your go at throttle up. Engines now back up to 104%. Three good APUs, 3 good fuel cells on Challenger. 1 minute, 30 seconds. Velocity now 3,200 feet per second. The rate of climb 2,000 feet per second.
In just a few seconds, you'll see the solid rocket separate from the orbiter. With the amazing cameras that NASA has, you can see several miles out.
There they go. There's solids have a parachute in the nose, so they'll fall away and then come back, be picked up later on today and brought back and used again.
It's probably one of the better pictures we've ever seen of the actual separation of the solid rockets.
Very good and very stable. With it's a tremendous lens on the camera to look at that. You can see them moving away from the vehicle.
So after an aborted launch 17 days ago, a temporary hold put on this afternoon after a problem with one of the gyroscopes, the Space Shuttle Challenger and Spacelab 2 is on its way to space for a week-long science mission. We, of course, will continue our coverage of the flight of Challenger throughout the mission, as always, here on CNN. But right now, stay tuned for Newswatch.
Velocity now 5,100 feet per second. The rate of climb 1,400 feet per second. Challenger Houston, 2-engine TAL capability. Answer 2-engine TAL. That call tells the crew they have the capability to make a Zaragoza, Spain, transatlantic abort should one engine fail.
Can you turn the earpiece down?
3 minutes, 16 seconds.
CBS News, I'm Dallas Townsend.
There is no plan to come home. They intend to seek a nominal mission duration.
That was the voice of Mission Control announcing after a few minutes of hair-raising uncertainty that the Space Shuttle Challenger will continue with its 7-day mission.
This is Frank Motek at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. 97 minutes past its scheduled liftoff this afternoon, the Space Shuttle Challenger roared into orbit. 6.5 minutes later, the Challenger reported a problem never experienced in the shuttle program.
At about 90 miles high, at about 10 minutes, I would say, into the flight, after we had released the solid rocket boosters, which are the giant solids on the side, we experienced a shutdown of the center main engine on the space shuttle.
NASA spokesman Jim Mizell says technicians are now considering how to deal with the problem. Basically, he says because the center engine shut down, the shuttle was not brought into its proper orbit. Technicians are now assessing what to do with the Challenger. Today's launch was delayed initially by a problem with one of the 3 gyroscopes in each of the 2 solid fuel rocket boosters that helped give the shuttle the thrust needed to reach the proper orbit. Frank Motek from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Incorporated.
CBS News, I'm Carol Kozetsky. One for NASA and the Shuttle Challenger crew. One of 3 main engines failed after liftoff, creating a lower than desired orbit. A blast from the maneuvering engines managed to lift that orbit, but it's still about 20 miles lower than planned. Despite the problems, officials say they're still planning a full week-long Spacelab mission, and they say the crew has begun its scientific experiments and should accomplish most of its goals.
The Hard Luck Challenger crew troubleshoots new problems. Actor Rock Hudson is flown home for treatment of AIDS. The latest budget proposal lies in shambles. Good morning. This is Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. Spacelab scientist astronauts aboard the troubled Shuttle Challenger are having problems today operating several of their experiments, including a $60 million device for pointing telescopes at the sun. But Mission Control in Houston is sure those problems with power and overheating can be overcome. None of these new difficulties compare with the hair-raising close call right after yesterday's launch. Martha Teichner has our shuttle story from the Johnson Space Center.
The read on the shuttle mission at this point is very little lost. The crew is already at work on some of the 13 scientific experiments scheduled for the flight. It's almost business as usual. But it was far from usual yesterday when the shuttle left the Kennedy Space Center. Not quite 6 minutes after liftoff, Challenger's computers shut down the center engine when 2 of its sensors overheated. A sensor on the right engine was also reading hot. No shuttle has ever lost an engine before. NASA admits no shuttle mission has ever been closer to disaster. There were never plans to bring the shuttle down, however. By dumping fuel, Challenger managed to maneuver itself into orbit, a lower orbit than planned, but the crew was safe, the mission could go on, and most of the scientific experiments were preserved. Some will be restricted, but others may even produce more data because of the shuttle's lower orbit. Throughout the night, ground staff at the Johnson Space Center in Houston and the shuttle crew have been assessing what will work and what won't, and what went wrong yesterday. They want answers before another shuttle goes up. The next scheduled launch, August 24th. Martha Teichner, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
CBS News, I'm Douglas Edwards.
CBS News, this is Paul Lockwood. Another test Wednesday of a $60 million pointing device on board the Challenger space shuttle. There's a focusing problem with the pointer, which is a key element in 4 onboard experiments. Down on day 1 of the mission, the space agency believes it was caused by faulty sensors and not by an engine failure.
Secretary Schultz sits down in Finland with Moscow's new foreign minister. Congress sings the budget blues. South Africa calls home its top diplomat here. Good morning. This is Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup.
Shuttle Challenger has become a round-the-clock space lab with the 7-man crew split into a day and night shift. Overnight, the crew has been studying the outer layers of the Earth's atmosphere by trolling a sophisticated device from the end of the shuttle's robot arm. Despite Challenger's lower orbit, scientists say they are getting important information. But it's nearly impossible for most of us to understand. Conversations sound like this.
The first scheduled objective is to measure the dependence of the beam-plasma interaction as a function of the electron injection pitch angle.
Spacelab officials admit the experiments are difficult for most people to comprehend, but they say that for scientists, this is the most important spaceflight in the last 10 years. Peter Van Sant, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Congress nears final budget agreement. The common market moves against South Africa. East and West mark the 10th anniversary of the Helsinki Accords. Good morning. This is Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. Astronauts early today used their remote arm to haul in a small science satellite they deployed to study the wake of their spaceship. Today, they're continuing to work on trying to fix their bulky telescope aiming system, which hasn't worked right yet. A killer storm hit Cheyenne, Wyoming. Congress writes fini to the 1986 budget resolution. Controversy in South Africa surrounds a lawyer's death. Good morning. This is Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. Halfway marked now, and despite its problems, NASA scientists are delighted at the mountain of data being collected by the Spacelab experiments. Peter Van Sant has our story from Houston.
It is remarkable to be observing the sun while we're drifting over the coast of Africa.
Challenger's crew spent the morning zeroing in on a sunspot with a special solar telescope. Spacelab officials say they have managed to work around problems with the instrument pointing system to get steady telescope measurements. Earlier, the crew sent signals to various ham radio groups across the country that could be converted into pictures. NASA officials now doubt that Challenger will attempt to climb to a higher orbit for better solar observations. Maneuvering fuel is scarce, and officials want to save what's left for Challenger's return to Earth on Monday. Peter Van Sant, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
New light is shed on the final seconds of a doomed Delta airliner. The first Walker Navy spy trial begins today. President Reagan is due to hold his first surgery news conference. This is Frank Sedapani with the CBS World News Roundup.
Challenger has beamed its first pictures of the sun back to Earth using the telescope that had been given up for dead earlier in the mission, but suddenly came to life yesterday. The shuttle was slated to return home today, but things are going so well, the landing has been put off until tomorrow. The ball players call a strikeout pitch. It's homecoming day for the shuttle crew. The world pauses to remember Hiroshima. Good morning, this is Frank Sedapani with the CBS World News Roundup. Challenger comes to a close today. Bruce Hall reports from the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
Challenger astronauts are headed home after a journey scientists are calling a sensational success. That is in contrast to the beginning of the flight when an engine cut off put the shuttle in a low orbit, and many of the scientific experiments would not work. But as the days in space went by, the scientists overcame their difficulties and were given an extra day in order to carry out their experiments. Mission manager Roy Lester said that made a big difference in the mission, which took nearly 10 years to plan.
That's what doing science on the shuttle is all about. You take a bad situation like that, and to make the kind of recovery that we've made, it's just outstanding.
Scientists say they have been able to gather about 80 to 85% of the data they'd hoped to collect on the mission, and they will have no complaints when the shuttle touches down this afternoon at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Bruce Hall, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center.
CBS News, this is Doug Poling. Solving the mysteries of the sun and faraway galaxies, the Space Shuttle Challenger is coming home. Challenger and its 7 astronauts are to touch down a little under 3 hours from now on a dry lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Uncle Sam is enlisting...
CBS News, I'm Douglas Edwards. Negotiating doors have been closed and it's ready for the trip home. The Space Shuttle is scheduled to touch down in less than 2 hours at Edwards Air Force Base in California. The weather there, clear skies, a bit windy. The crew of 7 is carrying back an enormous amount of scientific data gathered during the 8-day mission. CBS News, this is Doug Poling. The Space Shuttle Challenger, which collected a host of data on the sun and distant galaxies during its 8 days in space, is coming home in less than an hour. Bob Scott of station KNX has a report.
Challenger's coming home with a perfect score. All of the 13 experiments in the Spacelab 2 package functioned to some extent, and for that scientists are grateful. NASA officials aren't saying how much data they picked up during the extended mission. They say that's up to the scientists to decide when the shuttle gets back to Earth. Landing now scheduled for 3:45 p.m. Eastern Time at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Weather here at Edwards is excellent, just light winds and clear skies and temperatures in the upper 90s. Bob Scott for CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.
CBS News, I'm Marlene Sanders. This has landed.
Touchdown. Main gear down. Nose wheel coming down. Touchdown on the nose gear.
The Shuttle Challenger's 8-day trip is over. The ship landed a few minutes ago.
The Challenger ended its mission in picture-perfect fashion this afternoon. It flashed across the California coast shortly after 3:30, sped north of the Mojave Desert, plunged through the sound barrier over to Edwards Air Force Base, and broke into a clear blue desert sky. The crowd on hand, not as large as many past shuttle mission landings, but those in the reviewing stand here at Edwards broke into applause. 4 minutes after it appeared over the desert, the shuttle touched down on runway 23 at Edwards Air Force Base, rolled to a smooth landing, and stopped. The mission completed. This is Bob Scott for CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.